this social struggle predates the freedom struggle that took place during the colonial period. It predates even the colonial period. It is something that goes back several centuries. My book has a great deal of material on the term Sanatan Dharma, or people who were referred to or who called themselves Sanatanis or Sanatanists. This is because I deal a great deal with the battles that took place within Hindu society in relation to caste. So you had two different sections of Hindus engaged in this battle. One was avowedly orthodox, and they were in it to preserve these eternal values as they saw them, and therefore they called themselves Sanatanis. They resisted change, and on the other side were these reformists or liberal Hindus who would cite modern values and principles, even if they were borrowed from the West, or even if it was something they imbibed because of colonial rule. That was the basis on which these battles were being fought, and that is how, from the early 19th century you have milestone reforms like, say, abolition of sati, or permission that was granted for widow remarriage, or the enhancement of the age of consummation, what they call the age of consent bill. All such reforms took place in the 19th century as a result of these battles that took place between Sanatani Hindus and the reformist Hindus. The term Sanatana Dharma was historically used not to refer to the entire Hindu community, but to that ideology or that section of Hindus who were deeply orthodox or conservative and typically belong to the elite castes. Followers of Periyar use Sanatan Dharma as a derogatory expression. We have to bear in mind the history of social reform battles that Periyar waged, especially in the context of liberating the institution of marriage from the clutches of the priestly class. He came up with this Suya Maryade or self-respect form of marriage, dispensing with the need for a priest to solemnize that wedding. More importantly, he dispensed with the notion of Kanyadan, or the notion of the bride being given away by the bride's father to the bridegroom. He institutionalized through Suya Maryade the principle of marriage being a union of two equals. Taking on orthodox sections, Gandhi strategically portrayed himself as a Sanatani in a bid to neutralize their opposition, or to carry them with him. This came out most vividly in the context of temple entry. You know, he, as a votary of, as an avowed votary of Varna, the original caste template in our scriptures, for several years he was himself opposed to the idea of Dalits being allowed to enter temples. It was only after it was only in the aftermath of Pune Pact that he felt the need to make a reciprocal gesture to Dalits. When we look back at the colonial attitude to social reform or caste reform, there were two distinct phases. The first phase was the period prior to the 1857 revolt, and it was in that phase that they carried out two major reforms. The first being the abolition of sati in 1829, and the next one was legalization of widow remarriage, Hindu widow remarriage in 1856. Now, post 1857, they became very cautious because the violence that they saw in 1857 itself was engendered because of the perception that the colonial rule was tinkering with religious sentiments, and their policy was that it is only when there is a consensus in the community concerned that they would be party to any legislative measure in that context. There were repeated efforts to bring about inter-caste marriage, but it was opposed tooth and nail by the sections that were orthodox and often called themselves Sanatanis. It was a reform that was first attempted in 1918 by none other than Vithalbhai Patel. He was the one who moved that bill. He was the elder brother of the more famous Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And Vithalbhai Patel met with stiff resistance from orthodox Hindu leaders in the legislature. So who were these conservative elements who were opposing his bill? They were from within the Congress party. You had people like Madan Mohan Malviya or Surendranath Banerjee, who were at different points of time presidents of Congress party. The colonial administration was rather concerned about any resistance that was offered by the orthodox section. They stalled on this issue, and it was only after independence that in the year 1949 the caste reform legislation was finally enacted, which means it took over 30 years of battles. Even after this reform was carried out in 49, post-independence, it's not as if that Hindu society in general embraced it. Even in the year 2023, which is more than 100 years after this caste reform battle was initiated, right? Inter-caste marriage is still not the norm. There was a survey that shows that it's about 5% or maybe maximum 10% of people have inter-caste marriage even in this day and age. From the point of view of social reform, from the point of view of caste reform, colonial phase was a glorious phase, because it was only during the colonial phase, it is only because of the mechanisms that were put in place, the systems that were put in place by the colonial rule, the rule of law that was applicable across the British India, that such reforms could be enacted and implemented across the country. Reforms like say abolition of sati, reforms like legalization of widow remarriage, or enhancing the age of consummation of marriage, so, or introducing civil marriage, or what we call special marriage. These are all reforms that took place during the colonial period.